All right, we are now recording. Good morning again, everybody. So, does anybody remember what day it was last Tuesday?
Oh, 4th of July.
Yeah, that's kind of the way I feel about it, but I decided I'd talk about it today. I can't remember. A day of way too much meat, for a lot of people way too much alcohol, and the dangerous risk of pyrotechnics landing on your neighbour's roof and burning the house down, right?
The flags.
The flags, yeah.
Risk of 10,000 flags.
You've got lots of potential risks with flags too.
Yeah.
So it's a holiday. So today I want to talk about holidays and rituals. Holiday comes, of course, from holy day, and in the UK we have lots of holidays, and a summer vacation is also called a holiday, which actually sounds a little silly if you're not used to it, but if you think about it, a holiday, it's a holy day, but it's a day set aside for ritual, for remembering, for something important, for something set aside. So we use that for Independence Day, we use it for Thanksgiving. These are holidays. They're not holy, but in a way they're sacred and they're set aside. In a way, a vacation is too. These are times set aside. July the 4th has shifted in meaning for me. When I first came over here 30 years ago, it was all exciting. You know, the flag waving stuff, people jumping up and down, the barbecues. In the South, of course, you get invited into people's homes and there's like this immediate intimacy. At least there was for me. I was brought over as like a special toy in the firm. You know, I was used as a marketing tool. I was invited to all these people's homes and just this immediate intimacy. And then a year later, it hadn't changed. It was the strangest thing. You get invited in so far, and then it just kind of stops, which was kind of funny to me. But July the 4th was very southern. But it was really interesting to me, and I got to really like a lot of the ritual. But it has changed a lot for me recently. There are life reasons that it's changed. My first wife and the mother of my children were now divorced, and the kids are grown and gone, and Beth's father's died, and her family's not, frankly, much fun to be around on the phone. So there are like domestic reasons why that's changed. But also, to me, July the 4th, sidebar, and I'll come back. July the 4th, it's based on really wonderful ideas. The idea is fantastic. Freedom. It's about freedom. And it's also, there's a national spirit underneath that, the bodhisattva spirit, the being that lives to save other beings, this missionary zeal of democracy. There's something beautiful there. But I mean, this is just me, but I've found myself rather jaundiced by what feels like divisiveness coming into that, where so much of the celebration is about systems of discrimination, systems based on privilege, based on consumption, based on exploitation, systems, frankly, that cause suffering. So we've got this bifurcation here, and that piece of it is just hard for me to get on board with. But it also talks, some of the other reasons it's faded are what happened over the last 4 years, COVID. Right? People don't get together like they used to, and a lot of stuff just fell apart during COVID. So stepping back from that, ritual is really important in our lives, and part of the reason people had so much of a hard time through COVID, you can pick on the individual things, but if you think about it in this sense, it was the overall arc of the dismantling of ritual. Hitting the horn when the person cuts in front of you on the way to work and you're going to be late. That first little morning greeting when you arrive at the office and you just say good morning to everybody, you get a cup of coffee, or wherever you go in the mornings. And then all the transition stuff, the weddings, the birthdays, the school, the graduations and the school plays and all of this stuff. These are all rituals in our lives, and they're so important. And we suffer when they're not there. We don't really, most of the time, think about them as ritual in this way. But they are. And ritual is really, really important. So this is where my notes come in. Ritual, I came across a definition of ritual. I was looking for a definition, and I came across one, not perfect, but it will serve the purpose. Ritual is acts done in a specific order. So our service this morning, repentance and refuge, the sutra verse, the Heart Sutra and so forth, beginning with the prostrations and then with a little bit of preamble before that. Acts in a certain order, they have symbolic meaning, and they serve no particularly useful purpose. So it's not a perfect definition, but it gets to a kind of sense here. A couple of rituals, sort of famous rituals, not mine, but the stories I heard. So Grandma, why is it every Thanksgiving you cut the last inch off the joint? Or Mum, why do you do that? Because Grandma always used to do it. So Grandma, why do you do that? Because otherwise it won't fit in the oven. So it becomes a ritual, and it just becomes part of who we are to do this ritual. It's part of that sequence of activities, and it's part of the statement of us coming together as a family. Rabbi, why do you always bow when you walk into that little room at the back? Because the previous rabbi used to do it. Get the previous rabbi. Rabbi, why did you always used to bow? Because if I didn't, I'd bang my head on the ceiling. Same thing, right? There's usually a reason embedded in why these things start, but it becomes just this set of steps we go through that have no particular meaning, but they bring us together. So, what is ritual about? Well, on the ones, this is a list. Values. The ritual of July the 4th has a certain stated set of values. I find the manifestation of it diverging from those values, so I diverge from that ritual. But the value system is an important part of a ritual. It creates time. It marks a beginning, and it marks an end. We will finish today with the Bodhisattva vows, so we've got a ritual to mark end. We've created time, created that space. And it also, within that, by creating time and punctuating time, it creates predictability. It creates social bonding. And when you, for those of us who are used to chanting together, just letting yourself drop into this and being part of that collective action of ritual creates belonging. You go to a football game, soccer game, whatever, and you're there with all the singing and the chanting. You come together. Ritual brings you together. One of the reasons sports in this country, sports arguably is this country's great ritual. There's so much of it, and each sports event is riddled with ritual, and the existence of that sport activity itself, and the number of water cooler conversations and so forth about how did the Braves do last night, and, that is just huge ritual. So, and it's this time thing. And I'm sorry, I'm on bonding right now. It has collateral benefits, like it probably, I think this is probably true, improves health, improves performance, can lead to positive emotions. It can also help with practical things, pain thresholds. You're able to tolerate more pain if you're in this ritual environment. There's a safety, there's a sense of belonging, and there's a lot happens when you enter that space together. Important ones for me: safety. It's the sense of belonging, the sense of ritual creates predictability, creates belonging, creates a sense of safety. That's important. Counterintuitively, I think it also creates a sense of freedom. Every great book was written by somebody who was an absolute master of the language in which they wrote it. The rules of the language are precisely what offers the freedom to come up with masterpieces. Same with great compositions, great music. So having this container that we agree on in which we're living actually allows freedom within it. Malcolm Gladwell, in one of the books that I will never read, which, business books should be like 10 pages, not 250 pages, he said something along the lines, it was about choice. And the example that was used, I am told, was a grocery store aisle. And if you go down a grocery store aisle and you've got half a dozen different cereals to choose from, that's great. There's freedom of choice there. If you've got an aisle that's as long as that wall, and you've got about 50 different kinds of cereal on there, what on earth are you supposed to do? That's not freedom. So having some level of structure, some framing, actually allows for freedom. And it reduces stress. Stress is how Thanissaro translates, who's many of you know, he's one of my favorite Theravadan teachers. It's how Thanissaro translates dukkha, which is suffering, the Four Noble Truths. Existence of suffering, the cause of suffering, our own egos. That it's possible to end suffering. We see that in others, we see that in ourselves as we practice. And the path, which is what we're engaged in here. It's about suffering. Ritual reduces stress. We know this in our own experience. Ritual reduces stress. Ritual helps us move towards the end of suffering. So, recovering ritual, we're talking about post-COVID, it's post-COVID, things are coming back together again. Well, no, they're not. They're different. They will always be different. The world's changing. COVID in many ways was an accelerator of change, and Donald Trump was another one. He's an accelerator of cultural change that was already underway. So you've had these events in the last few years that have been major accelerants of social and cultural change, disrupting ritual, making us feel not at home, not safe, terribly insecure, and elevating stress. So finding ways to rebuild ritual in our lives, I think, is a really important thing for us to look at. Both as just a social coming together activity, but also for in ourselves, in our own hearts, as a way of de-stressing ourselves, finding ways to bring ritual. Most of my ritual, and I have a lot of ritual, I've come to realize I have built a lot of ritual in my life. Most of my ritual is centered on calming, and it's centered on the practice. So I get up every morning and I brush my teeth. And then I go and I sit. But I don't just sit. I light a candle, do 3 prostrations. I've got a few verses that I've memorized, so I chant one of my verses, and then I sit. And then I do my little dedication of merit. I'm going to do some more prostrations. And then, important, I go get my first cup of tea. Actually, I missed a step. Before I go sit, after brushing my teeth, I put the kettle on. Because one of the strange idiosyncrasies of this country is, if you have 110 volts and not 240 volts, it takes a terribly long while to boil a kettle. So I want that kettle to at least be reasonably warm when I get out into the kitchen. So anyway, so a cup of tea, and then I sit down and read, and then Beth gets up and she has her own little ritual, and then our rituals converge, and we talk, and then we walk the dogs, and then we have breakfast. The first 4 or 5 hours of my day are solid ritual. Solid ritual. You could get me out of the house before 9 o'clock, but it'd have to be pretty damn special. And then there are lots of other rituals during the course of the day. And then every Monday is I have, because I work here, and de facto that's what happens. So that means Monday is my Shabbat. So Monday is a day of quiet, of not engaging with the world, of introspection and reflection, and have my own particular things I like to do on a Monday, it's a day set aside. So if you like, I have a holy day every week. What's the difference between that and a holiday and a vacation? It's a day set aside. And it's ritually set aside in the same way that Brits for 2 weeks in August either go to Florida because it's cheap, insane but cheap, or they go to Costa del Sol, which is the pejorative and ridiculous term used for the Mediterranean resorts, where they go and act like complete and utter bores. And if somebody doesn't understand them, because they're not going to speak Spanish or Greek, if somebody doesn't understand their English, they speak louder and slower, and generally with a slurred voice. So it's time set aside. It is part of ritual. And then you come back and you talk about it and you prepare for the one next year. So how do we build? So first, I think it's important to see the importance of ritual. And then how do we build ritual meaningfully into our lives? Each of us is responsible for our own ritual. We have our own communities. A lot of my ritual is around this place. I come here 4 or 5 times a week, right? And I have my little rituals when I come here. This is my home for ritual. This is an important part. This is my community. So I build community around belonging. I build ritual around belonging here within this community for me. And some of that, as we all just did together, we share. One part of ritual is just daily practice. We talk about daily practice and just daily sitting. And the act of meditation, if you think about it, that is just ritual at one level. Do acts in a specific order. Whatever it is, if you light a candle or you do prostrations or you do a little verse, there is a ritual you go through when you enter that sitting space. You've physically entered a room, you've addressed the cushion or the chair or whatever you're going to sit on, and you physically sit on it, then you get a couple of breaths to settle. There's ritual. Mind wanders off, you bring it back. There's a certain way you frame bringing it back. There's ritual. And over time, if we do this enough, it loses its meaning. It's just something we do. So the act of the meditation practice itself, the walking meditation practice, if that's how we do it in our daily lives, that is itself just ritual. Chanting, studying, setting aside time to study, particularly if you learn. It doesn't have to be much. There's in a lot of the sutras, mostly we see this in the Mahayana sutras, but it's also there in the Theravada sutras, and not as often, but it's there. If you learn just 4 lines of this sutra, you will wake up. Just 4 lines, even just a line, even just a word, that's enough. So yeah, we can learn pages of this stuff, but we could learn just little things. And then it's accessible, and then when we want to, we can return to that. So if it's accessible, it pops up in response to certain external stimuli. But it also means it's there, it's available. So when we do the dishes, we can recite it. When we get stuck at a stoplight, we can recite it. So we've got these there, which are something we can bring into ritual in our lives. We can pick certain cues to bring us back. Thich Nhat Hanh, most of you probably know, he used to ring bells at punctuated times during the day. So, the people on his Plum Village, his monastery, they'd be outside working or whatever, and somebody would step outside and ring a bell, and everybody would stop and take 3 breaths. Ritual. But it's a ritual that brings people together, and it's a ritual that brings us back into right relationship with our environment. Every time your phone rings, it goes bing because you've got a text. Every time it goes because you've got some social media message or something. Right? We can figure out what those are ourselves, but we can find things to land us on. Come back. Ritual, creating ourselves ritual, which creates this sense of stability. It punctuates time. It creates safety, and we can use them to create belonging and safety, and all these other things I was talking about. There is a point that I meant to mention a little while ago, which is most of you have probably come across the idea of no difference, no distinction between profane and holy, between the sacred and the everyday. So what's all this ritual about? Creating sacred stuff, creating rituals and holy days. Well, the no distinction comes from the perspective that we transcend both. We have this gradual path that we're working in our practice, which starts with just basic acts of generosity, very, very simple intention, recognizing the value of this and starting to move in the right direction. And as that path matures, the toolkit gets a little bigger, we get some more sophisticated tools in there, and we move down, and our view changes, the way we experience the world changes. For instance, we shift from seeing thoughts but getting caught with our thoughts in terms of content and start seeing them as phenomena, so more naturally we don't get caught up in the story that our thought is creating. We just notice, isn't that interesting? There's this thing that contains a story that showed up. Where did that come from? So our whole view shifts, and this point of no distinction between profane and holy happens as we move on down that path, and we kind of transcend both of these ideas. Another way of looking at it is simply to say everything is equally holy. So you're moving stuff more in the direction of holy than bringing everything down to a base level and say there's no such thing as holy. It's recognizing the wonder that is every moment. So as I reflect on this topic, I realize I have a holy day every week, sometimes many times a week. My day has a huge chunks of ritual. Every day has a huge chunk of ritual. Many have many more huge chunks. And my days are just populated with ritual. And the result of this is I am happier, far happier. I have a far greater sense of belonging and community. And I am freer than ever before in my life. So I would encourage you to give ritual some serious thought.